I'm Hillary Helstein. As you mentioned, I'm the director of the LA Jewish Film Festival. And I'm really honored to be here tonight in partnership with the Museum of Tolerance in presenting the film Plunderer. As you see on the screen, the life and times of a Nazi art thief. I'm not going to tell you anything about the film. I could just tell you that it's unbelievably eye-opening and shocking. And when you finish watching this film, the next time you go to a fine arts museum, you're going to look at things differently. I want to welcome the participants of the film. We have several people here who are in the film who will be participating in the Q&A following. Jonathan Petropoulos, he's going to come a little bit later, but the story follows him as he follows this Nazi named Loza. So we're really thrilled that he can be here with us tonight. And also Simon Goodman. Simon, are you here? Ah, nice to meet you, Simon. And we also have a very special treat. We have Randol Schoenberg, who is an art restitution teacher. Randy, you don't need any introduction. I would like to now present Plunderer, and we'll look forward to seeing you after, and please be sure to stay for the Q&A. The Q&A will be moderated by Mark Hattrick, the Deputy Director of the Museum. Thank you for coming.
This particular film, so riveting. I couldn't stop watching it, and I was making notes the entire time. So when I have to do more research on this, I have to find out more about this. But we'll get into that in just a few moments. My name is Mark Hattrick. I'm here at the Museum of Tolerance, and it is my pleasure to welcome you this evening. Let me tell you a little bit about the folks who are up here on the stage, and then we will have a little bit of a conversation this evening. So just to my left is Jonathan Petropoulos, Dr. Petropoulos. You recognize from the film. Is an American historian specializing in National Socialism and Nazi looted art, currently serving as the John V. Crowell Professor of European History at Claremont McKenna, previously taught at Loyola College in Maryland, and was the research director for the Presidential Advisory Commission on Holocaust Assets. Dr. Petropoulos has testified as an expert witness in several high-profile legal cases involving looted art, including the Altman case, which we'll talk about in just a moment, and the Kassirer case. And he's authored a number of books on Nazi-era art and politics, and has appeared in the documentary The Rape of Europa about looted art in Europe. Thank you for being here. Next to him is Simon Goodman. So Simon was here at the museum last time on this stage for his book, The Orpheus Clock, The Search for My Family's Art Treasure Stolen by the Nazis, and was one of the subjects and was interviewed in the film this evening. Born in London shortly after World War II, Simon Goodman entered the music business in the late 1960s, specializing in breaking new British artists abroad. Goodman is married to the actress and teacher May Quigley, has a son and 3 daughters, and he lives here in Los Angeles, where his search for his family's treasures continue. Wow. And at the last but certainly not least, Randol Schoenberg. Randy is a lawyer and a genealogist based here in Los Angeles, specializing in legal cases related to the recovery of looted or stolen artworks, particularly those by the Nazi regime during the Holocaust. Randy represented Maria Altman in her suit to obtain 5 Gustav Klimt paintings from the estate of Ferdinand and Adele Bloch-Bauer, as well as the Palais, the Viennese house in which the paintings were housed. Altman won her case before the US Supreme Court against the government of Austria in 2004, and the paintings were eventually returned to the Altman family. Schoenberg, yes. I have to say, Randy, in your honor, I'm wearing my Gustav Klimt socks.
Buy a pair for him. You should buy a pair for him.
We should get. Do you have it?
think I have almost every.
I think you probably have every permutation of Clint paraphernalia that's out
Slippers,
there.
the umbrella, yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to begin this evening with, let's just, it's an easy question. It's not, there's no easy questions. But this film, for me, paints such a vivid picture of post-war complicity. And then this question is to all of you. How much of the art world today, museums, private collectors, are still contending with the legacy of that silence that we so vividly heard about in this film?
I guess I'll start. We'll go down the line. I see the film as divided into two segments. The first part is about plundering, and it's supposed to give you a feeling of up close and personal with a Nazi art plunder and with this experience. And a book I wrote over 25 years ago called The Faustian Bargain about hands-on experts in the art world. I tried to do this, but it was a very superficial book. In Faustian Bargain, there's no treatment of any individual over 30 pages. We just didn't know that much about those individuals, and there was data protection laws, and this was an opportunity to get, as I said, up close and personal with a plunderer, right? And so I think that's what Hugo McGregor, the filmmaker, is able to do in the first half of the film. And the second, it tells a story about what happens to the plunderers after World War II. I mean, you just watched the film, you know this. But to show that so many rehabilitated their careers and they became part of the legitimate art world, right? And there were surprising connections to the art world. That theater, Ted Rousseau, was a link to Loza is astonishing, right? Because you saw that he was an OSS officer. He knew more about Nazi art plundering than any individual in the world at the time. And the fact that he takes advantage of this relationship, that to me spoke volumes, right? So those are the two halves of the film that I see. The first part to take you there and make you proximate, and you can feel what it's like to have your possessions stolen. And the second, you see, it's not just ancient history. And to answer your question a little bit more, I was struck by Ann Weber's comment. There's so many works we're looking for we haven't found, or what Simon's been doing for decades now, looking for his family collection. So there's a lot of unfinished business of World War II, and I think the film conveys that. Simon?
Thank you. Well, one of the reasons there's so much unfinished business is because it's so difficult when we do locate an artwork to actually get it back. Claimants like myself have to prove we are who we say we are. We then have to find documents that prove that we bought the painting. Then we have to prove we didn't sell them willingly. So the onus is on the victim's heirs to prove a perfect case. I've had claims, successful claims, ultimately in about 10 different countries. In no instance did I not come up with enormous resistance. I can name maybe on half of one hand, two museums that actually cooperated and returned things quite sort of swiftly. Even though they were all pretty much all aware of the true origins of those artworks and how they ended up in their establishments, I still, and not just I, all the claimant families have to go through hoops. I mean, my grandfather's paperwork was burnt by the Germans to begin with, so I'm at a little disadvantage. Ironically, I rely on Nazi records to prove that, the good news and the bad news is they did 3 very comprehensive inventories of my grandparents' home that totaled about 1,500 pieces. So I'm still looking for about 600 of those. But some cases, most cases take between 7 and 10 years. So nobody is making it easy for us, even when they sign on to the Washington Principles. Even in principle, they say, yes, yes, but when it comes to money, prove it. And that's a different story. Because, pass it on to the lawyer.
Okay, sorry. So I was going to also mention Ann Weber's comment there. She was the director. She is the director of the Commission for Looted Art, and she says 90% of her clients' artworks are not recovered. You just heard Simon talk about his family. I can give another example. Maria Altman's brother-in-law, so her husband's older brother, Bernhard Altman, had also an enormous collection. He fled just ahead of the Nazis in March of 1938 from Vienna. In June, so March, April, May, June, right? In June, there was a full auction of everything in his home with a printed catalog detailing everything in the home. That included all the artworks, and of the artworks, there were 4 paintings by Canaletto, an artist that was mentioned in the film, 3 photographs in the published catalog for this, and only 1 has been recovered. And these are artworks that are worth maybe $10 million now. We did recover one over 20 years ago, and it was I think $3 or $4 million at that time. So it's these are very valuable artworks. They weren't burned, most likely. They weren't thrown away. They're somewhere, right? They're hanging on someone's wall, and what happens is the person dies, they find it in a vault, they have it on the wall, and then the family has to figure out what to do with it. Some families go to an auction house, and then maybe someone gets notified that there's a stolen painting, but other ones stay basically underground. And so there's just a lot of these out there. And then to echo what Simon said about the difficulty, especially with museums, in the film, just remember that beautiful castle, Neuschwanstein, right? So during that section afterward, they showed some of the artworks that the monuments men recovered that had been taken for Hitler's collection and Goering's collection. And 2 of the paintings that Hermann Goering had were these Adam and Eve portraits by Lucas Cranach the Elder. You can see those in the Norton Simon Museum. They were completely stolen, looted artworks taken by Goering from the Goudsticker family in Holland, and then discovered at the Norton Simon Museum. And the Norton Simon Museum refused to give them back, fought the case, and which lasted many years, and won on a legal principle called the Act of State Doctrine, which just says that a U.S. court won't judge the acts of a foreign state, in this case the Netherlands, that refused to return the property and then ended up selling them to the person who sold them to Norton Simon. So though, if you want to see 100% looted artworks, just go to the Norton Simon Museum in Pasadena. I mean, but it's a real tragedy, and I think a very good example of, even in the United States, where we think of ourselves as much more open to these type of restitution claims, there is a lot of resistance and difficulty.
Thank you so much for that, and it just begs the question, so then, what does justice look like once restitution is no longer possible? What happens when decades have passed, or we open up a Swiss vault 100 years from now, and we find paintings? How do we even begin to unpack those kinds of situations?
Well, I like to think that restitution is always possible. And there was an effort back in the late 1990s to resolve the issue of Nazi looted art. That's what Stuart Eisenstadt, one of the leaders of restitution, was trying to do. And he realized that it's not something you can fix at one time. It's a complex of issues that's going to be with us for the rest of our days and our children's and grandchildren's days, right? In America, you cannot have good title to stolen property, right? And so there's always an ability to go back and take and return it to the person who was stolen from. It's different in Europe, and that's one of the reasons why it's so important to litigate these cases in the United States, and Randy's incredible accomplishment with Oster v. Altman getting standing in a U.S. court, because it's a different European law where they have the idea of a good faith purchase. So in Europe, it's probably going to be different, but in America, I know I will be helping Holocaust victims for the rest of my days, and this work will continue. There will be no closure. What else can one do besides return the work, which is the most important thing? Yes, there are labels. You can put, didactics up in the museum and acknowledge the history, and that's something. There's alternative dispute resolution. The museum keeps the artwork, and maybe they do something else that's acceptable to the claimant family. So there are other things one can do besides return the painting. As you all know, I think these families have lost so much during the Holocaust. The least we can do is return the artworks to them, right? And that has to be our first objective, and our first goal is to correct this injustice in this way. But the work will continue, I think, in perpetuity. That's my thinking.
Well, in my experience, of all the things that are still missing out there, a huge percentage of them are actually hiding in plain sight, and they're hiding behind various laws. And there are all sorts of other tricks and games. Willie Cotter in the movie talked about, the art world being, anyway. One of the things I've come across is that, especially with sculptors, painters, artisans of whatever kind, in so many cases, the names of the artists have been changed. The titles of the works have been changed. Then the provenances I found, the first painting I ever found was in Chicago, and in the provenance my grandfather had just been erased, and some obscure German living in The Hague had been put in his place, and so on. So we, families like mine are sort of erased from the history books in a sense. So much of it is identifiable somewhere. The problem is, it's very rare that a claimant family like mine has 100% conclusive proof, because without that, you're relying on the goodwill of the collectors, the art. I mean, a big factor is the big auction houses in the US, in the UK, in France, wherever, don't have to tell you, in fact, will never tell you who the consignor is. When I inherited my father's books, all his art books, I was stunned to find Sotheby's catalogues from even after the war. Didn't mention any owners, except on the rare occasion there was one where I remember it said, property of a lady. What sort of lady? So it's out there, but there's so many walls behind which the collectors, the galleries, and the museums can effectively hide or defend themselves. That then there's always the concept that a lot might have gone to Russia or South America, but out of all the pieces I've recovered so far, they've all been in North America or Western Europe, because that's where the money is.
So on the question of justice, I think it depends on your philosophy. So there's a prominent curator in England who I remember around that 2006 timeframe when we had success and there were some other restitutions. He was very opposed to the restitution. He said it doesn't make sense to give these back to the grandchildren, nieces, and things like that. These are artworks that belong to the people, right? That we've had them in our museums, in our public museums, and people deserve to see them. And that's, there is a case to be made for that. If you have a communist system, for example, where there's no private property, then yes, the property does belong to the people. Tellingly, none of these people ever say that about their own property. It's always someone else's property that belongs to the public, but their own house probably won't be donated to the public. So as long as we have private property, I think the correct solution is to return. And there is a case actually that Simon had, the paintings in the film, the Franz von Stuck, which serves two purposes here. One, it's an example of an artwork that had different titles. Often the artists actually don't give titles to their paintings, they're given by the dealers, and so each time they're sold, it might be a different one. What was the sensibility?
It was sin or sensuality.
Yeah, but
he'd done about 24 in that series.
Yeah, but there were
virtually identical titles.
Yeah, so I had a person who lives here in Los Angeles in the hills, and he contacted me and he said he got this claim from Simon. And when I assist him, I said, well, ordinarily I'm on the other side of these things. And he said, well, you don't understand. If it is, I want to give it back. And so I said, okay, well, I'll represent you under, that condition, and we'll do some research. And he was concerned because it had been given as a gift to him. He had it over his fireplace, I think, for 40 years, something like that, or more, and was, of course, very accustomed to having it and considered it his. And the issue was that the immediately prior owner, so who had bought it for him in the gallery, it had one name, and in Haberstock, you remember that name, one of the art dealers, and in his catalog it had a slightly different name, so it was Sensitivity or Sensibility or something like that. And so I went up to the Getty Museum, pointing that way, right? Is it that, whichever direction it is, right? I went to the Getty Museum, which has really the world's best library for provenance research, because they collect basically every art book imaginable. And I went and did research on this artist who I had not heard of before, Franz von Stuck, but he's a Bavarian artist, sort of pre-impressionist. And I went, and they had old catalogs, and I saw this picture in a, I think, 1903 catalog with the same name. So there was a portrait of it, and it had the picture and the name that Haberstock used, and then we had the picture with a different name, so it was obviously an identical painting that had been sold under two different or slightly different names. And so when I showed that to my client, he agreed then to give it back to Simon. So I think that's the just result, right? It's the correct result, and I think there are people in the world, there may be one or two at least, who do that and give the artworks back. But as Simon mentioned, it's usually a long, complicated ordeal in these cases.
If only they were all like that one.
Yeah.
That was marvelous. He helped me load the painting into the back of my old Jaguar. Shook my hand, and we sent each other, cards at the end of the year. Well, it goes to show if the collector get a good lawyer, all things are possible.
Well, no, this was it was a condition of me representing him, because, as I said, I don't usually.
Yeah, he was a very, very decent man, but they're few and far between.
Jonathan, I have to ask you, because I was just fascinated by your interactions with Loza. What went through your mind the first time you met him? How did you develop this relationship? What was it like being in a room with someone who, you've come to find out what you found out about him?
Bruno Loza embodied a combination of charisma, he had these sparkling blue eyes and a smile and a sense of humor, and terror, right? He was huge, right? It doesn't come out in the film necessarily. He was 6'4". When I met him for the first time in 1998, he weighed over 300 pounds. He eventually went up to over 350 pounds. And he was so big that when they had to take him out of his apartment when he was ill late in life, there was no elevator in the apartment. They had to get a hook and ladder truck and bring him out through the window. They couldn't get him down the stairs. They transported him. And he had the biggest hands of anyone I had ever seen before. And one of the things that sticks in my mind, after I finished the book, after he died, actually, no, I hadn't finished the book, but it was after he had died. We were filming the documentary. We were in Paris, and we were filming Philippe Sprang, the journalist you remember from the film. And Sprang showed me a letter I had never seen before, and it was from 1952. It was a German officer, an aristocratic officer, who had just learned that Loza had been acquitted by a French military tribunal. And he said, I met Loza in 1943 in Paris at the offices of the ERR, and Loza boasted to me then and there that he had killed Jews with his own hands. Right? And so that's obviously I learned that after he had died, and I couldn't confront him about that information. But it just sort of captured the quality of Loza, his physicality. He was so big, and these hands were, there's such mitts that they were there. And so, you know, he was a complicated figure, as you can see. You know, again, he had this charm, and he was, you know, personable, but, you know, there was something menacing about him at the same time. And the more I learned about him, the darker a figure he became. And so I'm glad that we've had this opportunity in the film to paint this portrait, which I think brings together those two elements, the charisma and the terror, if you will.
It certainly reminded me a little bit of Rod Lanzmann's Shoah, right? Because beyond seeing photographs, black and white photographs of sort of younger Nazis, we're listening to them and we're seeing them in full color. It was quite powerful to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I met Loza somewhere between 30 and 40 times over a 9-year period. And he was very moody, and I think that was very important to see him that many times. Also, he was not going to tell you his secrets on the first meeting. You have to go back and develop a relationship or rapport and get him to try and tell you things. But for me, it was very important because I could see the different moods, including when he became really angry. He didn't deny the Holocaust, but we had a discussion of the memorial in Berlin, the Peter Eisenman Memorial to the murdered European Jews, and he said, you know, es ist eine Beleidigung, it's an insult to the German people to put a Holocaust memorial right in the heart of Berlin, the Reich's capital, right near the Führer bunker. And he turned red and redder, and you could see the rage in him. And, you know, it was like an Otto Dix painting from the war, right? It was just, you could see the blood in the subject's face there. And I knew that was always part of Loza. There was that potential, this heart of darkness that was there.
Well, interestingly, the Franz von Stuck was actually hidden in Hitler's bunker at the end of the war, along with other paintings that belonged to him and his, you know, close cronies. But I've recently come across a document which Rose Valland could have used, because it proves that Loza himself personally, normally he was very clever. The first painting I recovered was a Degas in Chicago, which had been taken by one of Loza's cronies called Hans Wendland. So he used intermediaries. It's never his name on the deal. But this paper was signed by the owner of a storage unit in Paris, which my family used, and it says clearly that Loza himself took, without a receipt and sans payer, without paying, the Signorelli, the Van Goyen, which ends up in Hitler's collection, and 5 Louis XV armchairs.
Yeah. I mean, he was very clever, right? He's a PhD, and you know he's using his intellect to commit crimes. You know, but I think it's really striking how so much material has emerged since his death in 2007, including the Philippe Sprang letter about murdering people with your own hands, and that too. And there is a lot of evidence out there. We're still learning new things. We're going to archives, and we're still discovering new material. Don't think everything's been done and written. This is merely a contribution to this history. There's so much we don't know about Loza. There's so much we don't know about this world of Liechtenstein and Switzerland, right? This is an initial, foray, right? It's not a finished study in any way. It's a work in progress in this way.
I'd like to just sort of add that when they're beating my poor grandfather in Berlin, it's a facet which still baffles me. The Germans could have just taken the silver, which was mostly gold, more gold than silver, but anyway. And it was stored in a villa on the shores of Lake Starnberg, which is just south of Munich, belonged to a Nazi dealer called Julius Böhler, who was one of the many who went back to business in Munich after the war as if nothing had happened. They were trying to get my grandfather's signature to what had happened is all this family silver belonged to our family trust. And just as the Germans were invading the Netherlands, my grandfather transferred all his shares, he had the majority of shares, to his non-Jewish brother-in-law in Italy, who happened to be connected to Mussolini and was also an Italian senator and had been the Italian ambassador to Berlin. So the Germans respect, you know, it's very strange, they respect their own laws, and then, because my Italian great uncle was trying to get a lot of it shipped to Italy, this is in the middle of the war, they wanted to divide the collection into Aryan and non-Aryan silver. But then the German Nazi Ministry for Culture stepped in and declared the whole thing a German national monument. Admittedly, most of the silver had been made in Augsburg and Nuremberg, so in Bavaria, in the Renaissance. But the point is they wanted my grandfather's signature to rescind the share transfer to the non-Jew. Because as soon as that happened, the family trust became a Jewish entity again, and then under their law they could just absorb all the possessions, but you know, controlled by that corporation. So the silver sat in these crates in Bavaria until the American army showed up in 1945. And then you saw images of 2 gold clocks from our collection, one of which made the title of my book. As the American soldiers were taking all these crates out after they'd sat there for 3.5 years, Julius Böhler had to steal the 2 clocks because he couldn't just bear to give everything back without, you know, paying himself for his hard work. So it's just a by the by, but it's very strange. The Germans wanted everything in writing, they wanted it. Hitler made a point of saying, I don't want it, he said, I don't want any looted works. And somehow he ended up with 12 of our paintings all the same, but that's because on paper, somebody had paid my grandfather for these works of art. The money would then go into a frozen bank account, and then at the end of the year, the money went back to Berlin. But it's just to give you an idea of the chicanery that went on. To begin with, there was outright looting, especially say in Vienna, when the Anschluss, within a day, they were taking paintings off the walls, and this was people who were working for the police. So it was an outright theft, but after that, it gets more and more complicated as the war progresses. Sorry, I digress.
No, I actually want to thank you for that, because it is so clear that your struggles, your family story, it's not about the monetary value of these paintings. It is so much more, and it brings to light these moments in this history that we would not know otherwise if not for folks like you and your dogged and continuing effort to stay on this and bring all of this work and all of your family's history back to light. So I do want to acknowledge that. Randy, I'm curious. Do you believe that international law, as it currently stands, is it sufficient to address these claims? Are there reforms needed?
Well, so it's law and international law. So most law is really national because it's decided by your own court, and under U.S. law, international law can be incorporated through treaties and things like that. Jonathan mentioned one issue. I already mentioned the issue with the Cranach paintings in the New York Simon, this act of state doctrine. I think that needs some reform, but the main issue in a lot of these cases is that the artwork goes through different jurisdictions, and the question is what law to apply. So you have, for example, a case concerning another Pissarro painting that's in Spain. It was actually purchased in the United States and then brought to Spain. The family of a German collection ended up in Spain. Anyway, very complicated. But it's not completely clear what law you would apply in a lot of these cases, because when an artwork is purchased here and then transported there for viewing and then sent over here for purchase and then brought here, right? Where are you going to apply? And sometimes the laws are different. So Jonathan mentioned the good faith purchaser law. It's true that in the United States, we have adopted the rule that a thief cannot convey good title. What that means is that the original owner remains the owner of the property no matter how many times it's stolen and traded afterwards. In most other countries, they have a limit on that, which says that if someone buys something in good faith, even though it's stolen, then they can get title to the property. And we also have good faith purchase laws here, but not for unique items like artworks. So what happens when someone buys a painting in Paris in 1960, 1980, and then sells it to a dealer in New York, and then is what law to apply? A lot of these cases, because when an artwork is purchased here and then transported there for viewing and then sent over here for purchase and then brought here, right? Where are you going to apply? And sometimes the laws are different. So Jonathan mentioned the good faith purchaser law. It's true that in the United States, we have adopted the rule that a thief cannot convey good title. What that means is that the original owner remains the owner of the property no matter how many times it's stolen and traded afterwards. In most other countries, they have a limit on that, which says that if someone buys something in good faith, even though it's stolen, then they can get title to the property. And we also have good faith purchase laws here, but not for unique items like artworks. So what happens when someone buys a painting in Paris in 1960, 1980, and then sells it to a dealer in New York, and then in the United States buys it? That was a case I handled concerning a Picasso painting, for example, that had been, a German family had sent it to a formerly German dealer named Tannhäuser, who then left it in his home with all of his collection and escaped to New York. If you go to the Guggenheim Museum, there's a Tannhäuser wing that has the rest of his collection that he recovered. But anyway, this painting disappeared and was sought after the war. No one knew where it was. And then in the 1970s, it reappeared in France. So after 30 years after the war, which is a limitation that they have. It was sold then to an American dealer who had it in his gallery in New York, and I think still quite innocently, a very wealthy family from Chicago, the Allstorff family. There's an Allstorff wing on there at the Art Institute of Chicago. They were, strolling down Fifth Avenue or Park Avenue or whatever, and saw this painting in the window and decided to buy it, this Picasso painting, for a lot of money. I think it was $375,000 at the time. And then had it in their home in Chicago. And then the husband died, the wife wanted to sell it, and it sort of reappeared on the market. And there ended up being a lawsuit over it. Okay, so what law applies? It was, the artwork was in here, in Los Angeles, then it went back to Chicago. So is it California, is it Illinois, is it French, right? Or New York, right? What law applies really matters, because, for example, if that New York dealer who bought it in France in the 1970s and brought it over, if he got good title under French law, when it arrives on our shores here, is it stolen or is it good title, right? And do we recognize the French law that says he bought it free and clear, or do we apply retroactively, in a way, the American law that says it's still stolen? So those are really complicated legal questions, not completely resolved in our law, and it's a reason why a lot of these cases are very difficult. It's a reason why that case, the Picasso case, ultimately settled, because there's this uncertainty, right? Are they going to rule one way or the other? So when you ask, do the international laws need to be changed, I think that's the number one issue right now. And it depends. Sort of psychologically, when I used to teach this at USC Law School, I'd say, buying in good faith from a nice gallery in Paris, you think, okay, maybe we want to respect the French and their law, there's a civilized country, but, imagine in Iraq, when after the Iraq War, and someone takes a an artifact from Iraq and goes to Yemen and sells it in Yemen at some bazaar, and then they bring it to the United States. So are we going to apply the European rule, the good faith purchaser rule, which I like to call finders, keepers, losers, weepers, right? Are we going to apply that rule? And then it sounds like, oh no, we should never do that because buying something at a bazaar, but why not? Why is that different than buying at an auction house or a gallery in Paris when we know, after seeing this film, that the art world is filled with thieves of every type, whether they're fancy people wearing suits and ties or people in cloaks in dark alleys. It's sort of the same everywhere. So I think that's the type of unified litigation that in a perfect world we would have, but we don't.
Thank you for that. I know we can be here for hours listening, but I do want to wrap up and ask you to share your advice or your thoughts to the next generation of historians and lawyers and cultural leaders who really will continue this work on restitution and hopefully truth-telling. What would you say to them?
Well, I just spoke a lot already, but I always say these cases are difficult. A lot of people come to me and say, oh, I want to be an art restitution lawyer, and I said, first find a client, right? And so you need to know someone like Simon or our family friend Maria Altman before you can really engage in this type of work. And it really, and I think Simon will echo this if he speaks next, it comes down to a lot of luck. And each individual case is going to be handled differently. So the advice is good luck.
Don't throw anything away.
Yeah, don't throw anything away.
Keep every little bit of paper, 100 years later it might be worth more than its weight in gold. But it's all about information and what survives through the generations and what gets thrown away, what disappears. I mean, you talk about the Alstorff collection in Chicago. I mean, a reputable family, big collectors, all that. Well, they have a Renaissance pendant from my family's collection, and Mrs. Alstorff, has no recollection of where she bought it, and so we just, we have a brick wall. I can't prove conclusively the Germans took it. All I can say is we still had possession in 1932. And after that, it disappears. I can't say when it disappears, but it's up to us to prove.
If I can add something, since we're talking about Alstorff, I took her deposition, and interestingly, in her collection, they also had East Asian artworks from Cambodia and places like that had been looted from temples in that area, and she had very early and willingly given that back. And I asked her what was the difference between things taken by the ERR and that. She said, well, those things were in Asia were obviously stolen, right? She didn't think of the looting and taking of Jewish-owned art in Europe as theft. I had to point out to her that Rosenberg, a different Rosenberg, who was the namesake of the ERR, is one of the 10 people executed after the Nuremberg trials, right? So it's like, she didn't consider that a crime, but that's sort of the block that a lot of people have. They don't consider what happened to the Jews as crimes, unfortunately.
You demonstrated that with Loza when you asked about, did he know my family, and he didn't have anything to do with that part of it. That part of the war, it was nothing to do, his hands were clean.
In the face of a lie like that, I would leave you with something more positive and uplifting. We have seen tremendous progress in this field of restitution in the 40 years I've been doing it. I see one of my mentors here, Stephanie Barron from LACMA, and I was working with her when I was a graduate student, 1989-91, on her show Degenerate Art, The Fate of the Avant-Garde in Nazi Germany. It was before computers. Stephanie was trying to find the purged artworks the works that were in the Degenerate Art Exhibition, and she was doing this without a computer, and she was writing to colleagues in Germany and doing this. What we can do now with computers and databases, it's a whole different world in terms of this. And it's given us resources, and don't think that everything has been written and everything's been done. We have so much material out there still to process and go through, including material in Russia. I believe there's not just stolen artworks there's documents that we want to process as well. So with databases and with technology, we've really turned this into a golden age in terms of restitution issues, right? And so I hope we'll build on this, and the next generation will come along, and it's up to us to train the next generation as well. Right? We have to have people who have the foreign languages and have the expertise to do that, and we need to do better in that field. The Europeans are doing better. They have chairs in Germany and universities to study restitution and provenance research in that too, but we need to train more people, because the tools are out there for us to do better, and we owe it to previous generations, to the victims and the families, to keep this work going for the future.
Thank you. And I think that's a great